In about 60-plus nights, Portland, Oregon saw what could be considered a peaceful night after protests got turned violent and federal forces began to pull back their presence in the last couple of days. The controversy, though, is still far from over. Let's talk about it with Nate Hochman, who spent a little time in Portland documenting it all for City Journal. He's up late with me on the Final Five. So we've seen the images coming out of Portland. We've seen a lot of the attention paid there. Talk to me about what you saw when you decided to take a drive over and see what was going on with these protests that have certainly, as we see some of the images here, turned violent.
Yeah, there's a lot of peaceful protesters in Portland, just like there are a lot of peaceful protesters throughout the country. What sets Portland and a few other cities like it, aside from a lot of the peaceful protests that are going on throughout the country, is that things have turned really nasty in the last 30 days or so. A lot of the demonstrations have been co-opted by a radical, violent fringe, to be honest, and things have become incredibly violent. And what I've seen as someone who lives just outside of Portland and drove in last week to watch things happen, is things really escalate. Mm-hmm. You know, real violent standoffs between folks who are, trying to attack law enforcement and law enforcement officers, vandalism of buildings, and even in Portland's case, the firebombing of a local police station. So unfortunately, what was initially a peaceful protest movement in Portland has really become anything but peaceful in recent months.
So I feel like we should point out, and I think at this point it's almost a given, that when we see these protests going on across the country, regardless of how they escalate, the genesis originally has been when it comes to either Black Lives Matter movement or whether it's the reaction to many of the instances of police brutality we've seen across the country. So as we see all of this play out, there was a lot of back and forth between the mayor of Portland, the governor of Oregon, and the White House and the feds when they decided to send some agents onto the ground. And it seemed like if you talk to the government, if you talk to the feds, the focus was protecting a federal courthouse, which is their prerogative. The concerns were what happened outside of that area, that perimeter.
That's right. And look, it's worth mentioning, I'm a First Amendment absolutist, or about as close as you can get to an absolutist on the First Amendment. I support peaceful demonstrations. I support the right to free speech. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, what the Trump administration has pointed out, and I think they're right on this one, Jim, is that what's happening in Portland is anything but peaceful. And I think it's unfortunate that a lot of folks in our political leadership, in our media class, are really invested in pretending that that's not the case. The Trump administration is well within their legal rights in this case to send federal agents in to try to protect the federal courthouse, which is the property of the federal government. And that's exactly what they did. And there's a lot of talk, especially from partisans on the left, that about this sort of being tantamount to imminent fascism. But that's really not the case. The Trump administration is acting on legal precedent that allows them to protect a federal courthouse, which is the property of the national government. The local law enforcement was completely overwhelmed in Portland. I saw that with my own two eyes. I talked to local law enforcement. They admitted it. They're not able to hold off a lot of the folks that are causing a lot of violence and destruction, and they needed the help of federal law enforcement officers to protect federal property. So
Nate, as we're running out of time here, but I have to talk about one thing, some parallels to something we saw around here about 5 years ago when we saw the city of Baltimore devolve into riots after the death of Freddie Gray. And you had an instance where the Obama administration did send in federal agents, National Guardsmen, but the difference there, it seemed, is that they were welcomed. You had Governor Larry Hogan saying, please come in and please assist the response here. I mean, we're looking at some of these images of the looting right now, and that, again, that's from 5 years ago. That certainly has nothing to do with the protest and getting a message across. That was just complete, dare we say, anarchy there. But we're looking at two similar situations, but different parallels.
Yeah, there are differences, of course, right? The significant difference is the Oregon legislature, which is controlled by Democrats, and Kate Brown, the Democratic governor of Oregon, has really made it clear that they're not interested in the Trump administration's DHS agents being in Oregon. What I would argue, though, is that that's a contradiction in terms, because Kate Brown and the Oregon Democratic legislature welcomed in armed BLM agents from the Obama administration in 2014 and 2016.
By the way, but BLM, just point out so people know, we're talking about Bureau of Land Management there.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, not Black Lives Matter.
Right.
But they welcomed in agents when it was from an administration that was controlled by a president that was in the same party. Mm-hmm. So it really is, to me, it seems incredibly hypocritical for partisans in the Democratic Party to talk about how the Trump administration sending in agents to quell the unrest is essentially authoritarianism,
right,
which is what a lot of folks are saying, whereas Obama made use of this very legal precedent multiple times throughout his presidency.
Well, Nate, we know that at least as the Fed started to pull back a little bit, and maybe there's some quiet, maybe there'll be some calm that prevails. But in the meantime, Nate Hochman, good to see you again. I appreciate the insight.
Thanks, Jim.
Final Five back after this.